On the cold steps of history, the concept of citizenship in America was forged, not through lofty ideals, but through the struggles of people long denied their humanity. Before we even begin to understand the implications of Trump's executive order targeting birthright citizenship, we must go back to the very roots of what it means to belong in this country. In colonial America, the idea of citizenship was narrow and exclusionary. Reserved only for free, land-owning white men, citizenship was not a birthright but a privilege rooted in race, wealth, and power. Enslaved Africans, whose labor built much of the early wealth of the colonies, were considered property, not people. They were denied the most basic recognition as members of the society they sustained. For indigenous people, the story was equally grim. Entire nations were stripped of their sovereignty and excluded from the concept of U.S. citizenship altogether. This exclusionary definition persisted as the young nation expanded. The question of who could be an American and who could not was formalized in one of the darkest chapters of U.S. legal history, the Supreme Court's decision in Dred Scott v. Sandford in 1857. The court, led by Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, ruled that African Americans, whether free or enslaved, could never be citizens of the United States. The ruling denied not only their rights, but their humanity. It declared them, in the starkest terms, as beings with no rights which the white man was bound to respect. The Dred Scott decision was a defining moment, not because it enshrined inequality, but because it galvanized abolitionists and pushed the nation closer to civil war. The outrage it sparked echoed through every corner of society, lighting the fuse of resistance that would lead to the bloodshed of the Civil War. When the war ended, the nation was left with a pressing question. What would freedom truly mean for the millions of formerly enslaved people? The answer came through the Reconstruction Amendments, a trio of constitutional changes that sought to redefine America as a nation of equality. The 14th Amendment, ratified in 1868, was central to this effort. Its language was clear and uncompromising. All persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States. This was more than a legal technicality. It was a radical reimagining of who could claim a place in this country. For the first time, citizenship was untethered from race, property, or lineage. It was a birthright guaranteed to anyone born on American soil. It was, in the words of its architects, a promise that the United States would no longer be a nation defined by exclusion. But even as this promise was written into law, it was challenged in practice. In the decades that followed, the 14th Amendment faced numerous tests. One of the most important came in the case of United States versus Wong Kim Ark in 1898. Wong Kim Ark, a Chinese-American man born in San Francisco, returned from a trip to China only to be denied re-entry to his own country. The government argued that as the son of Chinese immigrants barred from naturalization, he was not a citizen. Wong Kim Ark fought back, and his case went all the way to the Supreme Court. In its landmark ruling, the court sided with Wong Kim Ark, affirming that the 14th Amendment guaranteed citizenship to anyone born in the United States, regardless of their parents' immigration status. This decision not only upheld the principles of the 14th Amendment, but set a precedent that has endured for over a century. Today, the concept of birthright citizenship is a cornerstone of American identity. It ensures that no child born on U.S. soil is rendered stateless or denied the opportunity to claim this country as their own. It protects immigrant families, provides a path to inclusion, and reaffirms the idea that America is a land of opportunity for all who are born here. And yet, this cornerstone is now under attack. Trump's executive order seeks to dismantle this long-standing guarantee, targeting the very people who embody the spirit of the 14th Amendment, children born to immigrants who dream of a better life. To understand the stakes, we must examine the historical weight of this issue and how this order threatens to unravel over 150 years of progress. To understand the implications of Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship, it's crucial to first unpack what an executive order actually is, and perhaps more importantly, what it isn't. At its core, an executive order is a directive issued by the President of the United States to federal agencies. It is a tool meant to enforce existing laws, clarify how those laws should be implemented, or address pressing matters within the President's authority. The power to issue executive orders isn't explicitly granted by the Constitution. Instead, it stems from the President's role as the head of the executive branch, and from statutes passed by Congress. Executive orders have been part of American governance since its earliest days. George Washington issued the very first one in 1789, instructing his officials on how to carry out the details of the Neutrality Proclamation during conflicts between Britain and France. Over time, presidents have used executive orders to address everything from national emergencies to civil rights. But make no mistake, executive orders are not unchecked power. They must align with the Constitution and existing laws, and they cannot create new laws or amend the Constitution itself. When an executive order overreaches its bounds, it is subject to judicial review. The courts have the authority to strike down orders that exceed presidential powers, ensuring that the balance of power among the branches of government remains intact. To see this in action, we need look no further than history. During World War II, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which authorized the internment of over 100,000 Japanese Americans. While the Supreme Court initially upheld the order in the controversial Korematsu v. United States decision, the case remains a stark example of how executive power can be abused. Decades later, the U.S. government formally apologized for the internment and acknowledged it as a grave injustice. Another infamous example is President Harry Truman's attempt to seize control of steel mills during the Korean War through Executive Order 10340. His administration argued that a labor strike in the steel industry threatened national security. However, the Supreme Court ruled in Youngstown, Sheet and Tube v. Sawyer, that Truman's order was unconstitutional. The court emphasized that executive power has limits, even in times of crisis. So, where does this leave us with Trump's executive order? To put it plainly, an executive order cannot amend the Constitution. The 14th Amendment's guarantee of birthright citizenship is explicit and clear, and altering it would require a constitutional amendment, a process far more complex and demanding than the stroke of a presidential pen. Amending the Constitution is intentionally difficult. It requires approval by 2/3 of both the House of Representatives and the Senate, followed by ratification by 3/4 of state legislatures. This rigorous process ensures that changes to the Constitution reflect broad and sustained national consensus. No president, no matter how powerful, can bypass this process. Trump's executive order, however, attempts to reinterpret the 14th Amendment by targeting its application. The administration's argument rests on the idea that the amendment's framers did not intend to extend citizenship to children of undocumented immigrants or those on temporary visas. This interpretation flies in the face of more than a century of legal precedent, including the landmark United States v. Wong Kim Ark decision, which affirmed that birthright citizenship applies broadly. Herein lies the crux of the matter. By issuing this order, Trump is not merely testing the boundaries of executive power, he is challenging the very foundation of constitutional law. His administration has signaled its readiness for a legal battle, fully expecting the order to be challenged in the courts. The question is not just whether the order will survive judicial review, but what damage it may do in the meantime. It's worth noting that executive orders have become increasingly common in recent years, often used as a way to bypass a gridlocked Congress. While this may seem efficient, it raises troubling questions about the balance of power in our democracy. When executive orders are used to reinterpret constitutional rights, they risk setting dangerous precedents that could undermine the protections we take for granted. So what is an executive order? At its best, it's a tool to ensure that government functions smoothly and responds swiftly to urgent needs. At its worst, it's a blunt instrument wielded to sidestep the legislative process and test the limits of presidential authority. Trump's order on birthright citizenship falls squarely into the latter category, pushing the boundaries of executive power and raising the stakes for constitutional governance. On January 20th, 2025, Donald Trump was sworn in for his second term as President of the United States. Just 2 days later, he signed an executive order that many consider one of the most audacious moves in modern American history. The order aims to end birthright citizenship, a cornerstone of the 14th Amendment, and has sparked immediate outrage and legal challenges. But what exactly does this order entail, and why is it so significant? To understand its implications, let's break it down. The order, titled Executive Order on the Integrity of American Citizenship, seeks to deny citizenship to children born in the United States, whose parents are undocumented immigrants or on temporary visas. The administration claims that this move is necessary to address what it calls the misuse of birthright citizenship by individuals engaging in so-called birth tourism, or attempting to secure an anchor for legal residency through their U.S.-born children. Birth tourism refers to the practice of traveling to the United States for the purpose of giving birth, thereby granting the child automatic U.S. citizenship. While the administration has highlighted this as a major issue, studies suggest otherwise. According to data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, births attributed to birth tourism account for less than 1% of all U.S. births annually. This means the phenomenon is not as widespread as the order implies. Beyond birth tourism, the executive order also targets the millions of children born to undocumented immigrants living and working in the United States. These children, often referred to as the Dreamer Generation, are integral members of their communities. Many are students, young professionals, and active contributors to the economy. Stripping away their citizenship would not only upend their lives, but also disrupt the social fabric of the nation. The potential reach of this order is staggering. According to estimates by the Pew Research Center, there are approximately 5.4 million U.S.-born children living with at least one undocumented parent. If the executive order were implemented, these children would effectively lose their citizenship, rendering them stateless. Stateless individuals face significant barriers to education, employment, and basic legal protections, creating a ripple effect that could destabilize entire communities. Legally, the order attempts to reinterpret the 14th Amendment by narrowing its scope. The administration argues that the amendment's framers did not intend to grant citizenship to the children of undocumented immigrants or temporary visa holders. However, this interpretation runs counter to more than 125 years of established legal precedent. The United States versus Wong Kim Ark decision in 1898 unequivocally affirmed that anyone born on U.S. soil, regardless of their parents' status, is a citizen under the 14th Amendment. This sets the stage for a constitutional showdown. Legal experts from across the political spectrum have already voiced concerns. Mary Ziegler, a constitutional scholar and professor of law at Harvard University, calls the order a clear overreach of executive authority. She explains, "The 14th Amendment is explicit in its language. Any attempt to redefine birthright citizenship through an executive order is not just unconstitutional. It's a fundamental challenge to the separation of powers. The American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, has been even more direct in its response. In a statement released hours after the order was signed, the organization declared, "This executive order is an assault on the Constitution and the values it represents. We will fight it in every court at every level to ensure that this blatant abuse of power does not stand." The administration, however, remains defiant. In a press conference announcing the order, Trump declared, "This is about protecting the integrity of our nation. Citizenship is not a birthright, it's a privilege, and we must ensure that it is earned." Supporters of the order argue that it is a necessary step to curb illegal immigration and reduce the financial burden on taxpayers. But is there evidence to back these claims? Studies conducted by the Migration Policy Institute and the Economic Policy Institute have consistently shown that undocumented immigrants are net contributors to the economy, paying billions in taxes and supporting critical industries. The narrative that undocumented families are a drain on resources simply does not hold up under scrutiny. So what happens next? The order has already been met with multiple legal challenges, with states like California and New York filing lawsuits within hours of its announcement. These lawsuits argue that the order is not only unconstitutional, but also sets a dangerous precedent for executive overreach. The question now is whether the courts, including the Supreme Court, will uphold the principles of the 14th Amendment or allow this reinterpretation to stand. This executive order is not just about immigration policy, it's about the very fabric of American democracy. It tests the limits of executive power, challenges long-held legal norms, and raises profound questions about who gets to call this country home. In the next section, we'll explore the legal and constitutional debate surrounding this order and what it means for the future of citizenship in America. To fully grasp the stakes of Trump's executive order, we need to dive into the legal and constitutional dimensions. This is not just about immigration. It's about the framework of American law and the boundaries of presidential power. The 14th Amendment, a cornerstone of the Constitution, lies at the heart of this battle. Let's start by examining the amendment itself. The 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868 during Reconstruction. It was designed to address the glaring inequities left in the wake of the Civil War. Its Citizenship Clause reads, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside." The language is clear and absolute. It does not distinguish between the children of citizens and non-citizens. If you are born on U.S. soil, you are a citizen. This clarity was intentional. The framers of the amendment were acutely aware of the Dred Scott decision, which had denied citizenship to African Americans. They sought to ensure that such a ruling could never happen again. Citizenship, they believed, should be a birthright, a guarantee that no future government could strip away. Fast forward to 1898 and the landmark Supreme Court case, United States versus Wong Kim Ark. Wong Kim Ark was born in San Francisco to Chinese immigrant parents who were not U.S. citizens. After a trip to China, he was denied re-entry to the United States, with the government arguing that he was not a citizen. Wong Kim Ark challenged this, and the case went all the way to the Supreme Court. The court's decision was definitive. Under the 14th Amendment, Wong Kim Ark was a U.S. citizen. The ruling set a precedent that has stood for over a century. But Trump's executive order seeks to challenge this precedent. The administration argues that the phrase, "subject to the jurisdiction thereof," excludes children of undocumented immigrants and temporary visa holders. This interpretation rests on a narrow and highly contested reading of the amendment's intent. Legal scholars, however, point out that this interpretation ignores the historical and judicial context of the 14th Amendment. Mary Ziegler, a constitutional law professor at Harvard University, explains, "The phrase subject to the jurisdiction thereof has been consistently interpreted by courts to mean all individuals subject to U.S. law. This includes everyone except for specific exemptions, such as children of foreign diplomats or occupying enemy forces." The administration's argument effectively rewrites the Constitution without the authority to do so. What about the process required to amend the Constitution? Unlike an executive order which can be signed with the stroke of a pen, amending the Constitution is intentionally difficult. It requires approval by 2/3 of both the House and the Senate, followed by ratification by 3/4 of state legislatures. This rigorous process ensures that any changes to the Constitution reflect a broad and enduring consensus. Trump's executive order sidesteps this process entirely. It does not propose a constitutional amendment. Instead, it attempts to reinterpret the existing language of the 14th Amendment to exclude millions of individuals from citizenship. This raises profound questions about the separation of powers. Can the executive branch, acting alone, redefine a constitutional guarantee? Legal experts overwhelmingly say no. The Constitution explicitly divides powers among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches to prevent any single branch from becoming too powerful. By attempting to unilaterally alter the interpretation of the 14th Amendment, Trump's order oversteps the limits of executive authority. If allowed to stand, it could set a dangerous precedent, enabling future presidents to reinterpret constitutional rights at will. This isn't just theoretical. There's already significant pushback from the judicial system. Within hours of the order's announcement, lawsuits were filed in multiple states, including California and New York. These lawsuits argue that the order violates the 14th Amendment and exceeds the president's constitutional authority. Legal analysts predict that the case will ultimately be decided by the Supreme Court, making it one of the most consequential constitutional battles of our time. But the courts aren't the only battleground. The broader implications of this order extend beyond the legal system. If this reinterpretation of the 14th Amendment gains traction, it could erode the protections that millions of Americans rely on, not just immigrants, but anyone whose rights are safeguarded by the Constitution. So, where does this leave us? The legal challenges to Trump's order will take months, if not years, to resolve. In the meantime, the uncertainty it creates will have real consequences for families, communities, and the very concept of citizenship. The stakes couldn't be higher, not just for immigrants, but for the integrity of the Constitution itself. When discussing the implications of Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship, we must also examine its potential economic impact. Citizenship isn't just a legal status, it's a cornerstone of economic participation. The individuals targeted by this order contribute significantly to the U.S. economy in ways that are often overlooked or misunderstood. Let's begin with the numbers. According to the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, undocumented immigrants contribute an estimated $11.7 billion annually in state and local taxes. This includes $7 billion in sales taxes paid whenever undocumented individuals purchase goods and services, $3.6 billion in property taxes, either directly as homeowners or indirectly through rent, $1.1 billion in personal income taxes, even though many of these individuals are ineligible for most federal benefits. These contributions help fund public schools, healthcare systems, and infrastructure, services that benefit everyone. Importantly, this tax revenue is collected regardless of immigration status, disproving the notion that undocumented immigrants are a drain on public resources. But what about the broader economic contributions of immigrant families? Consider this. Undocumented immigrants make up a significant portion of the U.S. labor force, particularly in industries that are critical to the nation's infrastructure. In agriculture, they represent over 50% of all farm workers, ensuring that fresh produce makes it to grocery stores and dining tables. This data comes from the National Agricultural Workers Survey conducted by the U.S. Department of Labor. In construction, undocumented immigrants comprise approximately 24% of the workforce, according to the Brookings Institution. They build homes, offices, and public works projects that drive economic growth. In caregiving and domestic work, they fill roles that are increasingly in demand as the U.S. population ages. Economist Giovanni Perry, in his peer-reviewed study published in the Journal of Economic Perspectives, explains that immigrant labor, particularly from undocumented individuals, complements the U.S.-born workforce. By filling essential roles, immigrants boost productivity and even contribute to higher wages for certain groups of U.S.-born workers. Now let's consider the cost of exclusion. Trump's executive order would strip citizenship from millions of children born to undocumented immigrants, rendering them stateless. Stateless individuals face significant barriers to economic participation. They often lack access to higher education, legal employment, and even basic financial services like opening a bank account. This exclusion perpetuates cycles of poverty, not just for individuals, but for entire families. The Migration Policy Institute estimates that creating a stateless population in the United States could result in a $5.5 billion annual reduction in economic activity. This loss would stem from reduced consumer spending, lower productivity, and the long-term effects of diminished educational attainment among stateless children. The ripple effects don't stop there. Stateless individuals are more likely to rely on emergency social services, placing additional strain on already overburdened systems. Foster care, Medicaid, and housing assistance programs would face new pressures as families struggle to cope with the fallout of this policy. What's perhaps most troubling is that the rationale for this order is based on myths rather than facts. The administration has highlighted birth tourism as a justification, but this phenomenon is far less prevalent than claimed. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, births attributed to birth tourism account for less than 1% of all births in the United States. The overwhelming majority of children born to undocumented parents are part of long-standing immigrant communities, not opportunistic travelers. Moreover, the idea that undocumented families are a financial burden doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Studies consistently show that these families contribute far more in taxes than they consume in public services. For example, undocumented workers contribute billions annually to Social Security and Medicare, programs they will likely never benefit from. So, what happens if this executive order is allowed to stand? Beyond the immediate harm to families, it risks undermining the very economic systems that rely on the labor and contributions of immigrant communities. Stripping citizenship from millions of children won't solve the challenges of undocumented immigration. Instead, it will create new problems: economic instability, social inequities, and a generation of stateless individuals with limited prospects. The U.S. economy has long been sustained by the hard work and resilience of immigrants. Policies that marginalize these communities don't just harm those directly affected, they weaken the nation as a whole. In the next section, we'll explore the societal implications of this order, focusing on how it impacts communities, families, and the broader American identity. Laws and policies are not just words on paper. They shape lives, define communities, and reflect the values of a society. Trump's executive order targeting birthright citizenship is no exception. Its impact extends far beyond legal debates or economic data. It touches the very fabric of what it means to be an American. To understand the societal implications of this order, let's begin with the individuals and families who stand to be most affected. At its core, this order targets children born on American soil who, under the 14th Amendment, have been guaranteed citizenship for over 150 years. These children, often referred to as the Dreamer Generation, are integral members of their communities. They attend school, volunteer, and contribute to the economy alongside their peers. But under this order, their legal status and their future would be thrown into jeopardy. The most immediate consequence of this policy is the creation of a stateless population. A stateless person is someone who, under the law of no country, is recognized as a citizen. Without citizenship, these children would face profound barriers to education, healthcare, and legal employment. Imagine growing up in the only country you've ever known, only to discover that you have no legal right to exist within its borders. For millions of children, this isn't a hypothetical. It's the reality this order threatens to create. But the effects don't stop with the children. Mixed-status families, households where some members are citizens while others are undocumented, are already among the most vulnerable in the United States. These families live under constant fear of separation due to deportation. Trump's order would exacerbate this fear, making even basic tasks like attending school or seeking medical care fraught with risk. Parents may choose to keep their children home from school or avoid seeking medical attention to avoid detection, further marginalizing communities already struggling to survive. This fear and instability ripple outward, affecting entire communities. Schools in immigrant-heavy districts may see declining attendance as parents withdraw their children out of fear. Healthcare systems may face increased strain as families delay care until emergencies arise. Social services, from housing assistance to foster care, would bear the brunt of these disruptions. And then there's the question of what this order says about American identity. For over a century, the concept of birthright citizenship has embodied the idea that anyone born on U.S. soil is entitled to the rights and responsibilities of being an American. It's a principle that has allowed immigrants from every corner of the globe to integrate into the fabric of this nation, enriching it with their diversity, creativity, and resilience. This order challenges that principle, drawing a line between who belongs and who doesn't, based on arbitrary and exclusionary criteria. Consider the psychological toll this will take on affected families. Imagine being a parent, knowing that your child's future, something you've worked so hard to build, is now uncertain. Imagine being a child, growing up under the weight of knowing that the country you were born in does not recognize you as one of its own. The stress, anxiety, and trauma caused by this policy could have long-term effects on mental health, education outcomes, and social integration. Studies on the impacts of immigration enforcement on children paint a grim picture. Research published in the Journal of Adolescent Health found that children in mixed-status families are at higher risk for depression, anxiety, and developmental delays. The stress of living under constant threat of separation or disenfranchisement takes a measurable toll on their well-being. Beyond the individual level, this order raises larger questions about the kind of society we want to be. Policies like this don't just affect immigrant communities. They set a precedent for how rights can be redefined and restricted. Today, the target is birthright citizenship. Tomorrow, it could be voting rights, reproductive rights, or protections for other marginalized groups. The erosion of constitutional guarantees affects us all. This policy also risks deepening divisions within the country. Immigration has long been a polarizing issue, but this order adds fuel to the fire. It pits communities against each other, reinforcing harmful stereotypes and stoking resentment. As we've seen in history, policies that scapegoat vulnerable groups often lead to broader social unrest. But there's another side to this story. Across the country, grassroots organizations, educators, healthcare providers, and legal advocates are stepping up to support affected families. Community leaders are mobilizing to ensure that children and their families have access to resources, information, and advocacy. These efforts remind us that while policies can divide, people have the power to unite. As we navigate the fallout of this executive order, we must ask ourselves, what kind of country do we want to be? Will we be a nation that values inclusivity and equal opportunity, or one that turns its back on those who need protection the most? The answer to that question will define not just the future of immigrant families, but the future of America itself. To truly understand the significance of Trump's executive order targeting birthright citizenship, we must place it within the broader context of history. Policies that limit rights or target marginalized groups are not new. They are part of a pattern that has played out time and time again, both in the United States and around the world. By examining these historical precedents, we can uncover valuable lessons about the dangers of executive overreach and the resilience of constitutional protections. Let's begin with one of the darkest chapters in American history, the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. In 1942, following the attack on Pearl Harbor, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. This order authorized the forced relocation and incarceration of over 120,000 Japanese Americans, two-thirds of whom were U.S. citizens. Entire families were uprooted from their homes and sent to internment camps under the guise of national security. There was no evidence that these individuals posed any threat to the United States. Instead, the order was driven by fear, prejudice, and political expediency. The Supreme Court initially upheld this policy in the infamous Korematsu v. United States decision, arguing that the government had the authority to take such measures during wartime. Decades later, the U.S. government formally apologized for this injustice, acknowledging that it was rooted not in necessity, but in racism. In 2018, the Supreme Court finally overturned Korematsu, stating that it was a grievous error in American legal history. What does this teach us? It reminds us that even policies framed as necessary for national security can have devastating consequences for civil rights. It also shows that the courts, while imperfect, can serve as a check on executive power, albeit often after the damage has been done. Another important case to consider is Youngstown Sheet and Tube Co. v. Sawyer in 1952. During the Korean War, President Harry Truman issued an executive order seizing control of the nation's steel mills to prevent a strike that he argued would jeopardize the war effort. The steel companies challenged the order, and the case quickly made its way to the Supreme Court. In a landmark decision, the court ruled against Truman, stating that his actions exceeded the powers granted to the executive branch. Justice Hugo Black, writing for the majority, famously declared, "The president's power must stem either from an act of Congress or from the Constitution itself." This case set a critical precedent, reinforcing the idea that no president can act unilaterally without clear constitutional or legislative authority. This ruling is particularly relevant to Trump's executive order. Like Truman, Trump is attempting to use executive power to address an issue, immigration, that falls squarely within the legislative and constitutional domains. The court's rejection of Truman's overreach serves as a strong indication of how they may approach Trump's order. Of course, the fight for constitutional rights is not limited to the actions of presidents. In the mid-20th century, the civil rights movement faced numerous attempts to undermine the protections guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. Segregationist policies, such as Jim Crow laws, sought to deny African Americans the full rights of citizenship. These laws were justified under the guise of states' rights, but were ultimately struck down by the courts for violating the Equal Protection Clause. The most notable victory came in Brown v. Board of Education 1954, where the Supreme Court ruled that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. This decision was a turning point, reaffirming the power of the Constitution to protect marginalized communities from systemic discrimination. The common thread in all these examples is the tension between executive or legislative actions and the constitutional protections designed to limit their scope. History shows us that while the Constitution is resilient, it is not self-executing. Its protections must be actively defended by the courts, by lawmakers, and by the people. Trump's executive order targeting birthright citizenship is not the first attempt to limit constitutional rights, and it won't be the last. But the lessons of history make one thing clear. Policies rooted in exclusion and overreach often fail in the long run. They are met with resistance, overturned by the courts, and in many cases condemned by future generations. And yet history also teaches us something else, the power of resilience. Time and again, individuals and communities have stood up against injustice, using the tools of the Constitution to fight for their rights. From Japanese Americans who resisted internment to civil rights leaders who challenged segregation, their efforts remind us that progress is possible, but only if we remain vigilant. As we navigate the current debate over birthright citizenship, we must ask ourselves, what lessons from the past can we carry forward? How can we ensure that the rights guaranteed by the 14th Amendment are upheld, not just for some, but for all? Trump's executive order targeting birthright citizenship, a chorus of voices has risen in opposition. Advocacy groups, legal organizations, and community leaders have mobilized, united by a shared commitment to defending the 14th Amendment and the people it protects. These groups are not only challenging the order in court, they're also working tirelessly to support the individuals and families most affected. One of the most prominent organizations leading the charge is the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU. Within hours of the executive order's announcement, the ACLU issued a scathing statement calling the order an assault on the Constitution and the values it represents. The organization has vowed to challenge the order in court, arguing that it is both unconstitutional and deeply harmful to immigrant families. David Cole, the ACLU's national legal director, has been unequivocal in his criticism. In a recent interview, he explained, "The 14th Amendment is explicit. All persons born in the United States are citizens. This executive order is not just legally baseless. It's a direct attack on one of the most fundamental principles of equality in our nation's history." But the ACLU is not alone. Organizations like United We Dream, the nation's largest immigrant youth-led network, have also stepped forward. For years, United We Dream has been a voice for undocumented immigrants and their families, advocating for policies that prioritize inclusion and equity. In response to the executive order, the organization launched a nationwide campaign to educate the public about the stakes of this issue and to provide resources for affected families. In a recent statement, United We Dream's executive director, Gracia Martinez Rosas, emphasized the human cost of the order. This policy isn't about law or security. It's about stripping away dignity from our communities. Our families deserve to live without fear, and we will fight to ensure that their rights are protected. Beyond national organizations, countless grassroots groups have mobilized at the local level. These groups are providing direct support to families, including legal aid, housing assistance, and educational resources. Community centers in immigrant-heavy neighborhoods have become hubs of activity, offering workshops on how to navigate the legal system and advocating for policies that uphold the rights of all individuals. One such example is the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, or ILRC. Founded to provide legal assistance and education, the ILRC has been on the front lines of the fight against policies that marginalize immigrant communities. In response to the executive order, the ILRC has expanded its services, partnering with pro bono attorneys to ensure that families have access to accurate legal information and representation. But the fight isn't just happening in courtrooms and community centers, it's also playing out in the public sphere. Advocacy groups are leveraging social media to raise awareness and mobilize support. Hashtags like Protect the 14th and Citizenship for All have gained traction, amplifying the voices of those directly affected by the order. These platforms have become spaces for storytelling, where individuals share their experiences and call on others to stand in solidarity. One particularly powerful story comes from Maria, a young woman born in the United States to undocumented parents. In a viral video shared by United We Dream, Maria speaks directly to viewers saying, "I was born here, I grew up here, I am American. This order threatens to take away not just my rights but my sense of belonging. We are fighting for our lives and we need your support." These advocacy efforts are not just about stopping one executive order, they're about defending the principles of equality and inclusion that the 14th Amendment represents. Groups like the ACLU, United We Dream, and the ILRC remind us that the fight for justice is ongoing. They show us that even in the face of policies designed to divide and marginalize, there is strength in unity and resilience. As these organizations continue their work, they're asking all of us to take action, whether it's donating to legal defense funds, volunteering at community centers, or simply sharing accurate information. There are countless ways to support the fight for birthright citizenship and the families it protects, because at its heart, this fight isn't just about immigration, it's about who we are as a nation and who we want to become. As we come to the end of this journey, one thing is clear: the fight to protect birthright citizenship is about more than just a legal battle. It's about the principles that define us as a nation, principles of equality, opportunity, and justice. And while this fight may seem daunting, it's important to remember that we all have a role to play in shaping the future. So, what can you do? How can you stand up for the families and communities who are most affected by this executive order? First and foremost, educate yourself and those around you. The more people understand about the 14th Amendment, the history of birthright citizenship, and the implications of this order, the stronger the movement to protect these rights will be. Share this video with friends, family, and colleagues. Spark conversations about what citizenship means and why it matters. Use your voice to amplify the stories of those directly impacted. Second, support the organizations that are leading the fight. Groups like the American Civil Liberties Union, United We Dream, and the Immigrant Legal Resource Center are working tirelessly to defend the Constitution and provide critical support to immigrant families. Consider donating to their efforts, volunteering your time, or spreading the word about their work. Third, get involved in your community. Attend local events, workshops, or rallies organized by grassroots groups. These gatherings are not just opportunities to learn, they're a chance to connect with others who share your commitment to justice. Together, we can build networks of support that reach far beyond this moment. Next, hold your representatives accountable. Reach out to your senators, congresspeople, and local officials. Let them know where you stand on this issue and demand that they take action to protect birthright citizenship. Politicians pay attention to their constituents, and your voice can make a difference. Use online tools to find your representatives and send letters or make calls. Every action counts. Finally, don't underestimate the power of solidarity. Whether it's attending a march, sharing a hashtag, or simply listening to someone's story, acts of solidarity send a powerful message. They remind us that we are not alone in this fight. They remind those who are directly affected that their voices matter and that they are seen, heard, and valued. This isn't just about defending the 14th Amendment. It's about defending the idea that everyone born on American soil is entitled to the same rights and opportunities. It's about rejecting the politics of division and fear. And it's about building a future where no one is excluded simply because of who their parents are or where they came from. So, what kind of country do we want to be? Will we stand up for the values enshrined in our Constitution, or will we allow them to be eroded by fear and exclusion? The choice is ours. Together we can ensure that the promise of America, a promise of equality, dignity, and opportunity, remains alive for generations to come. If you found this video informative and inspiring, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. By spreading this message, you're helping to raise awareness and spark action.